Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us. Just before that break, we watched the Armed Forces Remembrance Day celebration, should I say, which took place in Abuja. But here in the studio now, we're actually going to discuss the Armed Forces Remembrance Day, and we're being joined virtually by two guests. It's my pleasure to welcome retired Major General Pat Akem Wenger, who is the Chief Executive Officer, Blue Point Leadership Consultants. Good morning. Major General Professor.
Good morning. Thank you so much.
We also have with us the CEO of Lani Group, Mr. Ani Basi Ayo. Good to see you again, Ani.
Good morning, how are you?
Morning, how are you?
Nice to meet you once more. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
Happy Armed Forces Remembrance Day. And
Same.
happy Armed Forces Remembrance Day.
Same to you. Well, let me start with the retired Major General, who also happens to be, who has a PhD in law, by the way. Major General, Armed Forces Remembrance Day. You used to be in the Army. What does it mean to you?
Okay, it means a lot. Let me start by thanking you for bringing me on to discuss this very solemn day and solemn occasion. You will recall that the Armed Forces of Nigeria are populated generally by very youthful, young Nigerians who are brave enough to volunteer to serve and prepare to lay down their lives for the nation. So the history of the Remembrance Day, like you discussed earlier, was tied to the Commonwealth generally. But at the end of the Civil War, Nigeria decided to set up this day, and we'll be celebrating it to honor not only those who served in the First World War, Second World War, but also those who participated in the Civil War and perhaps laid down their lives. And generally the officers and men that have served continually in various operations around the world and within the nation. So it's a very solemn day, very important day, a day that we remember the sacrifices that have been made. And I will perhaps say the nation should also be very grateful to this crop of men and women who have, some of whom have paid a very supreme price. So generally, it's a very solemn day. It's a notable day, a day to just remember the sacrifices that have been made.
Thank you, General. Annie, you are a civilian. What does Armed Forces Remembrance Day mean to you? And do you think that what do they call us now, bloody civilians? Do you think that the bloody civilians actually appreciate the importance of this day?
Thank you very much. I think what's very important is understanding the values of Nigeria and where we are today. I remember when I was a young child, there was a lot of noise and celebration around Armed Forces Day. But it has watered down over the years, that even when I watched that very solemn ceremony a few minutes ago, it just made me wonder how far we had gone down in remembering the soldiers. And in a different life, I lived in the United Kingdom for quite a many years. I studied there. What we call the Poppy Day 11/11 is well celebrated, and it's really recognized, and you understand and see the values of veterans. So to answer your question, as a civilian, I know it because I have seen it happen in other jurisdictions. I've seen it growing up. But I would say that a large percentage of our population is not aware of this day and what it actually means. It's not in our school curriculum. Nigeria is largely a country where 65% of the population are under 30. So these are people who have not really witnessed real wars other than what we have now with the insurgencies. And even with that, it's not linked to honoring of veterans. So I think a lot more needs to be done. And if anything, we have this beautiful day to unify all Nigerians and to create a rallying point where we could begin to be reflective, to look inward, and sort of redefine our peace, our solidarity, and our makeup. I think this is what we could use this day. It shouldn't be left to the government. It shouldn't be left to the military. It should be a public-private partnership to make it a day that is in the hearts of all Nigerians, a day that we remember those who constantly have fought for us.
Annie, thanks for refreshing my memory. It was called Poppy Day indeed, and when we were growing up, Poppy Day was a very important day, and we actually went out and marched wearing our poppies. But how many people wear poppies anymore? Do people even know what poppies are?
Dogs. That's the way it sounds to many
Ayo.
people. But General, you've been in the military. You rose to be chief logistics officer in the army before you left. And you know, one of the things that makes this day significant is remembering the unknown soldier and catering for the welfare of veterans, those who are late, well, the affairs of those who are late, their dependents, their spouses, their families, and all of those things. How well would you say, aping from what Mr. Basieyo said earlier, how well would you say people appreciate the sacrifices of men of the Nigerian Armed Forces over the years until now?
Okay, thank you so much. Let me start by first addressing that expression, that phrase, that thing that where my sister referred to, said the military call civilians bloody civilians. Actually, we have moved very far away from that. You have a crop of military men now that are very educated, enlightened, and they are very much aware of the fact that they volunteer to serve, and that it is the taxpayers' money that buys the uniforms they wear, the weapons they carry, so they respect civilians. I think the challenge is that we have become very ubiquitous. We are everywhere in Nigeria. So that mysticism that used to be associated with the military is lost. It will take deliberate efforts to bring it back again, because, you know, if you keep seeing soldiers, they become the familiarity. Now, you know, they say familiarity breeds contempt. Nigerians must begin to appreciate and understand that when they lie down in bed to sleep, there are soldiers in the northeast who are in the open to the vagaries of the terrain and the weather conditions. And in the northeast, when it is cold, it is cold. When it is hot, it is hot. And yet they stay in trenches. We must understand that soldiers are checkpoints and that they are doing this all for Nigeria. I was flying from Atlanta to Missouri. And on the flight, there were service personnel in US. There were service personnel on board, and the pilot came on air and announced that they had servicemen on board, and everybody clapped. I was in business class, and all of a sudden, one gentleman in business class moved to the back and came back with a sergeant to take his place. Wow. Such is the acceptance and the respect and the honor they accord the armed forces. And that can be replicated here. We only need to think that our businesses will not run well if the armed forces are not there. I will not be able to sleep peacefully if the armed forces are not doing the kind of jobs they are doing. Nigeria may even be invaded by a foreign power if the armed forces are not up to the task. So basically, we need to go back to appreciating the sacrifices that the soldiers and the officers have been making and have made over the years. Perhaps it may take some kind of socialization. And I'm not talking about turning the nation into a socialist country. I'm talking about deliberate socialization that makes a nation begin to love, citizens begin to love their institutions, because the armed forces is a very major component of element of national power. And every nation should be proud of its armed forces. So maybe some deliberate socialization may take place to make us understand that this is our armed forces, peopled by Nigerians, our brothers, our sisters, our sons, our daughters. If we do that deliberately, then maybe that may come back. Are the armed forces, the veterans, are they catered for enough? Are they treated well enough? Well, with respect to payment of pensions and gratuities and all that, the present administration has been trying. At least those of us who are retired will get an alert every month. Can something more be done? Yes, very much so. I mean, for instance, the disbarment allowance that has been paid, it was discriminated and segregated in such a way that some of us did not get it. It shouldn't be so. We're all served. We're all open to the same challenges and dangers that every other person was open to. So we should be paid to what? Basically, the government has tried. But it will take a lot of Nigerians also operating at various levels to actually appreciate the armed forces. NGOs, private organizations can contribute to make these soldiers know that their services are recognized and that the sacrifices they are making are recognized.
Well, we'll come to that part of the appreciation, but in terms of structure, you served in the military until about, say, 5 years ago. So in terms of the structures to ensure the welfare of the officers and men in the military, especially the ones that you say are in the trenches, we know they are there right now. To be honest, it breaks my heart every time I have to drive in the night to see. Let's just stick with the ones we can see all around, especially in Lagos. Policemen on the streets, on duty. That breaks my heart enough, that their wives, their children are at home, and when they go out, there is no assurance whether or not anyone is going to come home. It is heartbreaking enough, and it is very trepidating enough on its own. So, but in terms of structures to take care of the welfare of the people in the trenches who are doing the boots on the ground men who are doing the hard work, the heavy lifting of ensuring the sovereignty and the unity of Nigeria is as we want it to be. What, in your own opinion, would you say are the structures? How strong are those structures that ensure their welfare, especially those ones that are still in service?
Well, you are talking about, you are generally talking about the welfare and the supply of logistics and the things that are needed to conduct the operations they are involved in. The services are trying within the ambit of the provisions that have been made by governments. You know, maintaining an armed force of the scale that we have, even though we are not as many in the Nigerian army as I would have expected, we should be running an army that is close to 500,000, given the terrain we are covering and the multiple operations we are involved in. But even then, at the level we are now, the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the Air Force, the logistics you need to maintain troops at the scale we are in multiple operations, very high. So you will need to devote serious resources to it. So will I say that the resources and the welfare are optimal up to the levels required? No. But are we trying within the resources available? Yes. Because I served and I was in charge of troops, I commanded troops, and I saw what we were able to do with the resources we had. Can we do more? Yes, definitely. You need more of logistics, you need more men to be able so that troops who are engaged in the Northeast, for instance, engaged with Boko Haram and the other elements, for instance, can serve for a period and then withdraw back, rest and train and then prepare. But when you are operating with an army that is just maybe around 180,000, maybe 200,000, and you are committed at the levels you are committed, you will overstretch soldiers, and then you will start discovering that their welfare is being impacted negatively. So welfare is not just throwing logistics at people. It's making sure that the administration, they are able to do rest and recreation. They are able to, if they are sick, they are able to get the required medical treatment, whether within the country or outside the country. The armed forces are trying, but again, the government could do more.
Okay. Well, when you talk about getting more soldiers, there are those who would argue that how about the deployment of technology? We'll come to that. That's an operational question.
Yeah. I was even going to address that.
Okay. All right.
I was going to address that.
Okay.
You see, most developed armed forces are scaling down men because of technologies, emergent technologies. You can say that, but you know, it's not too applicable to Nigeria for now. We can actually scale up and then scale down when the need arises. For now, we are unable to deploy the technologies that other nations are deploying for various reasons, and I wouldn't want to even do too much on that. So, given the kind of operations you are involved in law enforcement operations. We shouldn't be the fault of the military. We shouldn't be getting involved in that, but we are, because the other services, the other forces that should have been doing that are not very effective in Nigeria. So you have an army, for instance, that is fighting in the Northeast, fighting in the Northwest, doing operations to protect our oil assets, and then doing law enforcement operations in almost every state of the Federation. Now, there is a limit to which you can deploy technologies to do this. You need full feet on the ground, you need boots on the ground to be able to effectively perform these roles. Perhaps one can say that you can train the Civil Defense Corps to a certain level where they can actually handle this. You can train the police to a certain level where they can handle. But until we do that, you will keep on having boots on the ground in these operations that I'm talking about. So you need men. For a nation whose land space is about 920-something thousand square meters, where you have a Sambisa forest that is larger than Lagos by 18 times, where you have some spaces that do not have, that are to some extent ungoverned, you will need a higher number of forces than we have.
Okay,
and
well, my
if you want
sincere
to
apologies.
replace that, you will need to build more barracks, you need to create more.
Well, General, you're definitely talking about,
there's a
all
lot
the
of logistics
things,
involved.
a number of issues, a number of these issues the CDS raised when we had a conversation with him yesterday. But let me take this to Mr. Basieyo. Now, for you, you heard the General talk about the need for the private sector to have some inputs in all of these welfare, especially of the fallen heroes, remembrance, and all of those things. How, in your opinion, do you think the private sector can come in? You're a private sector practitioner.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's the way to go. We're in the era of the Sustainable Development Goals, and there are 17 goals, and one of those goals is fostering partnerships. That's more private-public sector engagement with a more defined role for the third sector being NGOs, etc. So I just want to take our minds back to health and education. A couple of years back, a decade or two ago, when we moved from military to democracy, we knew that assets were totally dilapidated and, we had no assets in health and education. And we've seen progressively, we're not yet there, that we've had corporate organizations start to play more defined roles in those sectors. And there's been the Health Alliance. In education, we've seen lots of NGOs, lots of corporates come out to sponsor different investments. We call this investment corporate social investment or corporate social responsibility. It's happening. It's really happening in the sector. In fact, my foray into understanding the Armed Forces Remembrance has come through our education entity, Axiom Learning Solutions, where we work with Charles Bebe. Charles Bebe was a Major General who passed on many years ago. But his family, in his legacy, created a foundation. And one of the fundamental things they do is to honor the families of the fallen heroes on the Remembrance Day, such as this. So scholarships are awarded, and this year and other years we're looking into things like starting counseling services. So that's one example where we can get private sector involved. I was very, very impressed and enthused when I heard Oscar, Mr. Yema of Air Peace, announced priority boarding for veterans and soldiers in the last 1 week. And this is sort of thing where we're talking about appreciation. So the first thing we need to do really is to understand that the military cannot do it by themselves, neither can the civilians do it. So we need to work together. And working together, we must have a strategy, a point where, this is what the private sector can do. We can create a fund, we can fund scholarships. A lot of the problems, we're talking here about fallen heroes. We're not talking about the families. I see some of these families where they have to move out of the barracks within 6 months of their breadwinner passing on. I see families where they can't access education, they can't access healthcare. They're basically thrown into the trenches. So much as we're talking about the fallen heroes themselves, let's also understand that a lot of them are breadwinners and their families. We need to create appropriate mechanisms for them. It's not just about the pension, it's about creating sustainable social fabric that will cushion those families in the event of the loss of the breadwinner. And yes, we can have the private sector involved. We can create a fund, a multilateral fund that allows beneficiaries to get vouchers to schools, to get discounts maybe for their books, to get access into public health institutions to access medical care, and even to for transport, maybe things on airlines, etc., and that sort of thing. They can have that. They can even have priority access in some places.
Sorry to cut you short, Annie. Sorry, I'm really sorry to cut you short, but we've run completely out of time. But I would like to say that the Vice President's message at the church service to commemorate Armed Forces Remembrance Day. In that speech, he also spoke about the commitment of this government to the welfare of those that the fallen heroes have left behind. I wonder if that's any encouragement for you. Thank you very much, Annie Bassi Ayo, CEO, Lani Group, as well as retired General Pat Akem Vinger, former Provost Marshal of the Army and former Chief of Logistics, now CEO of Blue Point Leadership Consultants. Thank you very much, both our guests who joined us virtually. Thank you. Sunrise will return in just a moment with another interesting conversation, this time surrounding social media and fake news.